Welcome to the Exhaust Notes podcast.
What is good, everyone? Welcome to the Exhaust Notes Formula One podcast. My name is Nick Engvall. I'm with my guys, Todd and Rohit. We're going to get back into some racing. We've had a few off weeks. I don't want to say it was intentional, but, you know, when Max is winning all the time, you know, what else do we have to talk about? But I guess that's going to be up for debate in this episode. I'm just kidding. We all have just had life happening, and we're excited to be back talking about Formula One again. So what's good, guys? How you been?
I've been good. I mean, I've been traveling all over the world. I'm happy to be there with my team principal, Nick Engvall, and Todd Tholomew, my number one driver in the world. Yates, how's it going?
Living the dream. So I didn't know that you were traveling with the F1 grid this year. How was Jeddah and Saudi Arabia
they wouldn't let me go out if I went to Jeddah and Saudi Arabia. I think they would try to make me into a slave, allegedly.
Well, there goes our invite to the paddock.
Oh, man.
No, it's just nice to hear those dulcet tones of you two again. Like, I know that I think we left our listeners with the fantasy draft, if not the hot takes episode, which was quite the back-to-back pairing. And yeah, some of us have a 24-egg omelet on our face. So who knew Fernando Alonso? But before we even get started, Nick, how do you want to do this? Because it's been a minute, and I think we need to get our muscle memory back intact.
Well, I just figured that since Todd and I started talking about the Max and Lewis debate, you know, most of all of our conversation happens in the Discord, right? And so this last race, before we go to the first two races of the season, this last race kind of, you know, our good friend Aaron, who has been on as a host multiple times, was just a little perturbed that there was still conversation about Max and Lewis. But, you know, going back to our hot takes episode, I just need Lewis to get that one win. And I saw the chance right there in front of us in Australia. And unfortunately, they decided to have like the weirdest finish of a race since that last race that we don't want to talk about again. But, you know, I don't know. I don't even know if I think this is going to be the most chaotic episode we've ever recorded, because I just feel like there's so many things that are going to come up. And, you know, I think we can just free ball it.
You had me at free ball.
Freestyle. You could have gone anywhere with that. But we're going to go balls out.
Why not?
I like it.
Yeah.
So to recap quickly, Bahrain was Max, Checo, Alonso. Saudi Arabia was Checo, Max, Alonso. And finally, we have someone different on the podium in Australia with Max, Lewis, Alonso, which prompted the whole Max v. Lewis debate, which I think should be – I mean, I get why we were just talking about this. Like, I get why everybody that's a Max/Red Bull fan is, like, over it. Like we talked about, like, if you're a fan of a team and they did something bad en route to winning a championship.
Shout out to our guy, Mike Guillory, Houston Astros fan.
Yeah. Or it wasn't even necessarily – it wasn't Max's fault or Red Bull's fault at all, the way that Abu Dhabi 21 ended. But it's, as I think you were alluding to, Nick, it was the most – I would say it's probably one of the top three most important Formula One events, happenings ever.
Yeah, I saw you say that in the Discord, and it really got me thinking, like, it has to be, right? It's just – it was that much of a big deal in the moment. And
it entered pop culture. Like it transcended
exactly
the sport of Formula One to be like, and I said the top three biggest things ever in the history of Formula One were Senna's death, Michael Schumacher getting 7 world titles, which was like crazy. And now we have Lewis with 7, and it's equally as impressive, but didn't really get into the zeitgeist like that. And then Abu Dhabi 21. And I think that's the craziest things that have ever happened in Formula One in that order.
See, to me, I will push back a little bit gently, because I think before even Abu Dhabi 2021. I think Drive to Survive is, just because that's the reason why any sort of fan base that we have in America is because of that show. And yes, Abu Dhabi 2021 kind of did serve as the last, how would I say, ceremonial torch passing. And if I'm trying not to be too controversial, because I think ever since then, it's not been much of rivalry. Max has won every single race ahead of Lewis. I don't even think that the races that Lewis statistically was higher up in the positioning than Max, that it still felt like, oh, Max just didn't live up to the hype because his machinery let him down, or occasionally his petulance, or yada, yada, yada. It's not been a rivalry. And I'm probably the biggest Max hater on this podcast, but it is absurd to think that there is any sort of competitive balance between those two racers in the last 2 years.
Yeah.
That's short-sighted, I think. I mean, like, not necessarily against your point, but Merck didn't have the car to compete, right?
Right.
So it wasn't even like the Max v. Lewis thing couldn't even be there if we wanted it to be, like, unless Max had like damage and he was racing in 10th or something against Lewis, which I think we saw maybe once last year or something. But that goes to your point of, like, it doesn't really matter where Max was. If he wasn't in front, then it was not necessarily, it wasn't by Max's doing.
Right.
Essentially.
No, but and I think, Todd, as well, to your point, Formula One, as long as I've been watching it, has always been characterized not necessarily by the drivers who win a lot, but by the cars that allow those drivers to reach their winning potential. And it's never been the fact that it's been a perfect balance of Lewis and Mercedes, or Max and Red Bull. Depending on who you ask, some people think it's the cars. Other people think it's the driver. It truly is a chicken and an egg situation. But for me, it's now getting to the point now where we've got, in my mind, a sample size, because Checo is getting that first place if Max isn't, much in a similar way that I would maintain maybe Valtteri Bottas might have been, and definitely Jenson Button did in his 1 year that he won the title. And right now I would say this, say what you will about Red Bull's dominance, I still think Mercedes is a more dominant car, because they proved at least 1 year that somebody outside of Lewis Hamilton could still bring home a title for them. And that's what Jenson Button did in what's looking like more and more the improbable fairy tale of a year, because he truly shook up the status quo in a way that I don't think Formula One has ever seen since, because it seems that every time we come into a new season, there's an anointed chosen one. More often than not, that person does go on and win the title. But for that year, for whatever reason, the fact that maybe Jenson Button got inside Lewis Hamilton's head in a way that we could
never
Nico
really...
Rosberg? Oh, yeah, sorry. I don't know why I keep saying Sorry. I don't know why.
He never drove for Mercedes. At least I don't think he did.
Thank you for stopping me. So this is what we call a quick edit. So hopefully Nick has mastered deep fake and AI technology. And every time I entered in the word Jenson Button coming out from my mouth, Nick's going to clean that up and say Nico Rosberg. But at the same time, that's looking more and more like an anomaly. Like, I don't think Checo Perez, even in his wildest dreams, could push Max the way Nico did for Lewis Hamilton. And that, I think, also reasserts the fact that the car is the more dominant thing than an actual driver.
That's a good point. I mean, I think that the Nico Rosberg comparison is a little bit different, just because Lewis was still, I don't know, Lewis was still very new to winning at that time, right? Like, it wasn't like he
already had 4 titles, though.
Did he have 4 by then?
Yeah.
Okay.
1 with McLaren and 3 with Mercedes prior to that.
Yeah, that is kind of interesting. I mean, yeah, I don't see Red Bull, I don't see Checo winning a title in any way, right? Like,
right.
Red Bull is clearly like all in on Max, and you can tell just by the radio communications. Max is kind of complaining that Checo wasn't going to slow down for him was at Saudi Arabia. And it's like, I mean, I do understand that, but at the same time, like, Checo's like 5 or 6 seconds ahead, like there's no reason to like screw up the race just so Max can win, in my opinion. And
right.
Thankfully Red Bull has stopped short of that.
Yeah, it is Max's team. We know that. And I agree that Checo will never win a championship as long as he's racing against Max. Like, I mean that in the way that, like, say Checo left for Ferrari, say Carlos, gets fed up with Ferrari and leaves, and then
I think it should be Charles at this point because my guy, the smooth operator.
Yeah, Charles is a better. Charles is a talk about frustration. Holy shit! But we'll get to that. It's say Charles leaves Ferrari and Checo goes there, and then Ferrari builds a super fast car. Then I think maybe Checo could be Max, but Checo's never going to beat Max at Red Bull because that's Max's team.
Well, I don't want to cut you off, but this is a perfect time to shout out our latest review, Hot Take Redemption by Alarmingly Beautiful. Todd's hot take with Danny Ricciardo replacing Perez mid-season would absolutely make this listener happy. Hey, Stephanie. So, there you go, Todd. I mean, Checo just needs to get pissed off enough to leave, and then you're in. You got your hot take is number one.
Hey, girl. Hey. Just kidding. Thanks for the review, Stephanie. And I don't think that Checo is underperforming enough to get replaced at this point, sadly. Not that I want him to get replaced, but like I'd still love Danny Rick to be on the grid.
Do you think there's any chance that Checo gets just pissed off enough to leave Red Bull in the midst of a season?
If going back to what you just said, Nick, if they're racing 1-2 and Checo is number 2 in the drivers as he is now, and for some reason they call team orders, I think Checo would lose his. Not that he would leave the team, but I think he would get Corona for the next race, is how I would put it. maybe Spanish flu, something like that.
Montezuma's revenge, if we want to keep it regional.
That would piss him off to a point where he's just like, because right now, at least, I know that it's all just words, but like Christian Horner has said several times, that we have 2 drivers. There is no number 1. We let the cars race, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's going to remain true as long as they are 1-2 in the championship. Like, I don't think Checo's dumb enough to ever do anything to like take Max out, but it's really not going to matter because they're going to be so far out.
I feel like that statement is the sneakerhead equivalent of saying this is the last pair. Really, this is the last pair I'm buying. I'm not going to get any more. I'm deleting the sneakers app.
As someone who just took a few months off and then completely lost the bet on a pair of sneakers, that I had on a pair of sneakers because I hit, I completely understand that.
No, this is what Exhaust Notes does. It brings you these tangible examples that really hit you right in your feels, regardless what your special interest is outside of Formula One.
That's very true.
So speaking of special interests, I mean, going back to the Checo thing, one of us had boldly said that he expects Danny Ricciardo to race in at least 2 races this year. So really, I should be getting the shout out, Stephanie. So thank you for that. And but at the same time, it's not looking too good right now for somebody that's made that bet like I have, just because I don't think Checo Perez is that volatile character that we would assume him to be to throw a petulant fit. I think worst case scenario, we get that seasonal Montezuma's revenge if he truly feels bad. And then he goes back to Red Bull brainwashing camp and hopefully comes out a better person. And by better person, I mean a number 2 driver that has no squabbles with Max, because that's what's going to take. There's no other end game scenario. And I do feel happy because more and more every race, I look like a genius because of this 800-point Red Bull constructor title that I had guaranteed in the Hot Takes episode. And right now, who's to stop me?
I don't know. Max fans. I don't have a good answer for that.
So let me ask you this, if I can. We've gone on record saying we don't think Checo is dumb enough to take Max out of a race. Can we flip that equation? Is Max dumb enough to take Checo out of a race? Because I could see that happening.
No. Because Max is actually, and then we saw it in Australia this weekend, Max has leveled up in his strategic thinking or whatever. He left, admittedly, too much room into turn 1 at Albert Park in Australia this weekend and opened the door for Lewis, and Lewis went deep on the brakes and for the most part left him enough room on the track, but definitely squeezed him. And Max, being like old Max, would have tried to keep his line more, and they would have ended up in a shunt. But
What did you call me?
New Max conceded the position, kind of bitched about it on the radio, just like all the drivers do, and then know that, like, oh, my car's 30 miles an hour faster than you in a straight line, so don't worry, I'll get you back. And he did. He went around him like he was standing still. So,
speaking of strategic thinking, though, because you brought that up, because you said that, can we just talk about how Fernando Alonso has already plotted the 336,000 options for the next race in his mind and calculates them while driving at 200 miles an hour around a race course, and will correct the team engineers based on what, like, I literally picture the what's the hangover meme. That's Alonso's head at all times.
Oh, the calculations.
Yeah, the calculations. Like some of the radio responses from him in Australia were just like, wait, how is he thinking about this? Does he have the rule book with him? Is he currently reading while driving around the track? I don't get it. Like, I don't understand how he knows that stuff.
No, I mean, I think this is a hallmark of transcendent champions in every sport, right? So Kobe Bryant, who's done a great job in terms of mythologizing himself prior to his untimely death as well as after the fact, he was a stickler for the rule book. He knew every letter, every bylaw, every point 2, point 3, point 4. Bill Belichick has done the same thing. He's made a career out of extending his dynasty because he knew how to handle a certain special teams punt. Fernando Alonso is, in my mind, it's no longer about El Plan. He is la simulation, because he can basically see everything happening at the same time. And it's really that Doctor Strange quote where he's just meditating and he sees all 14 million outcomes at a given time. And he's always choosing the one that gives him the most opportunity. And that's why he always talks about missing out on points, because he's seen all the other 13.99999 million scenarios where he did get a point, but it's always, he just has the world's worst luck. And every time he picks a scenario, it's a scenario that ultimately results in him not getting enough points or getting any points at all.
La Simulation is amazing.
Because it's French and he's Spanish. And thank you. I'm a member.
I wasn't even questioning the origin of the nickname there, but he really is and has always been. We kind of talked about it in the Discord. But I think that comes along with racing for, what's he on, 22 years now?
Yeah, I think so.
I think
it's either 22 or 23.
Well, next year will be 20. Yeah, whatever. 20 plus years of racing. Most of those in Formula One. He's been doing it so long that he's just like, yeah, I know the rules, because like the general rule book doesn't change that much, and if it does have some drastic change, like there's a big hubbub about it, right? Like when they changed to sprint races, or in early 2000s when they changed the qualifying format, like. They make a big enough stink about it that every driver learns the rules, but he remembers every single rule and can recall that at 200 miles an hour while like closing the door on somebody. It's amazing.
Yeah.
So I feel like this 200 miles per hour for him is like 40 miles per hour for us. It's just repetitions. It's just slowed down for him. Like we don't have that technology yet, but I would love to know what is going through his mind during a Formula One race, because the only thing I can compare him to is another Formula One French racer that ultimately made it big overseas as well in the NASCAR circuit. And I'm talking about Jean Girard, who from that documentary Talladega Nights, I believe he was sipping an espresso during mid-race. So I feel like that's what Fernando Alonso does. But instead of an espresso, what's a Spanish drink? Maybe some horchata? Maybe a nice amaquilla? Who knows?
Yeah, that's a great analogy. I
definitely a Peroni, because he's sponsored by them.
Yeah. Peroni and Kimona have a collaboration that's coming pretty soon.
Yeah.
You guys, you can admit it. Oh, come on.
Of course I do. Where else am I going to get these shenanigans from?
La simulation.
We got sidetracked there a little bit from the initial point was Max v. Lewis. The question I want to know is, and I'm sure Trevor will rib me for this, but like, where the hell did Not to be very stereotypical F1 journalist, but where did F1 Mercedes pace come from all of a sudden? Like, granted, they're not at Red Bull's level yet, but not even a race ago, they were a second per lap. And I know it's track dependent and all that stuff, but they were over a second per lap slower than Red Bull. And in race pace, and they were like 7/10, 8/10 slower than them in qualifying trim. And now in qualifying trim, they're hundredths off or something. I can't remember what the qualifying. Actually, I can check that right now.
Yeah, but I mean,
were they?
Nick, go for it, because I have a couple thoughts on this, but I don't know how to frame it up, and you're far more eloquent and articulate than I could ever hope to be about this subject.
I don't know about that, but I just, in my gut, feel like Mercedes has kind of been sandbagging this whole preseason. You know, like, I don't think they're at Red Bull pace. I don't think anybody will be at Red Bull pace until we get way into this season. But, you know, like right now, as we're recording this, you're in the middle of a month break, right? And a lot of things can happen for the team. They don't necessarily need to be on the track racing in order to make improvements, in my opinion, right? And I think Mercedes has kind of perfected that anyway. And it's just them getting back to where they were at. Honestly, I've just kind of expected it, you know, like it's also just the you know, track dependency 100%, you know, is part of that equation. But to me, I think like Toto, Lewis they're like, you know, they're like any major rivalry in sports, right? Like, you level up to play against your fiercest competitors. And how long can you get your ass handed to you by Red Bull if you're Mercedes? If you're Toto and Lewis, how long are you really going to put up with like losing as badly as they have been? Because yes, for, you know, TV purposes and Netflix purposes and entertainment purposes, oh, we're battling for, you know, fourth or fifth, you know, we're watching, you know, AlphaTauri and McLaren, and we're chasing Aston and bullshit. Like, you only care about beating two people out there, Christian Horner and Max Verstappen. And if they think anybody buys any of that shit, I can't like really fathom that's not a huge part of how they're like chasing them down this season. It's going to be this way the entire season, in my opinion. But I'll get off my high horse there.
Oh, no, I think your high horse is lovely, and please give Duchess my best. My thought is this, though. The modern day Formula One era, I guess, would be characterized by initially the first 4 wins that Seb had in Red Bull. And that was followed by the subsequent 7 or 8 with Mercedes, including the one with Jenson Button. Wink. And now we've got the start of a new era where it's 2. And it's always a question of, okay, if it truly is a rivalry, each team or each person within said rivalry has to have 3 acts. We've now literally gone through Red Bull's attempt at trying to quell the insurrection that Mercedes had. And I don't even think it's an insurrection if you've won 7 or 8 championships in a row. Kudos to Red Bulls for pulling off what seems to be as dominant of a 2-year stretch as we've seen, but they still have 6 years to go before they could, in theory, match Mercedes' brilliance. And yeah, I mean, I think a lot of us have been waiting for Toto to unlock the sheer vengeance that came across with him wearing that black turtleneck and saying everybody is in our sights, because guess what? Last year, nobody was in your sights. You were wearing the Stevie Wonder glasses. You were basically hitting the track with the blind cane because you couldn't find your way to a podium until the very end. So it's nice that you guys have this, but it's right now, it's still one race in a grand scheme of what I would say 30 races where they haven't really looked like themselves. So cool. Good job. Let's see you do it again, because ultimately at the end of the day, I would say this: Fernando Alonso's got a better shot at winning a race than either one of them do at this point. And I hate saying that because I've got George Russell on my team. I really respect Lewis Hamilton as a driver, but it seems to me that the best driver and the best team not named Red Bull is the Green Bull, aka the Aston Martin.
I'm talking on mute. Did it again. All right.
Take a shot.
Yeah, it's going to become a drinking game. I love it. To counter kind of what both of you said, I actually think I read something earlier and I've been thinking about it since, but I feel like, and I think George was the one that said it, I feel like Red Bull hasn't even turned up the wick yet.
Really?
They're actually hiding pace. They're so far in advance in front of everyone that I feel like they're maybe running on like a slower, lower power engine mode, or they're like telling Max to like lift and coast because they don't want to. They're so far ahead that they don't want like the ire of the F1 paddock at them trying to slow them down and all the team principals coming together to like change the regulation all of a sudden that hurts them in some way. But two, they are preparing for the second half of the season when the testing kind of that Nick alluded to like kicks it, like really actually starts to hurt them in the development. I can't remember what it's called, ART time or something like that. But also, like, I agree with you, Ro, that I think the only real challenger to like actually winning a race this year is going to be Fernando Alonso. But I don't think that Mercedes does the whole like everyone else has a target on their backs and then comes out after the first race and writes like a sob story letter about how bad their performance was, that it hurt them like emotionally and stuff like that. I don't know if you guys saw that, but Mercedes did like a public press release about how, in their feels they were about how badly they suck.
It's not official until I get a Drake remix of that letter, if that is actually true, because that is truly me.
I mean, how do they come out?
Boy remix.
How do they come out and say that when Lewis finished fifth?
I think it was like a weird overreaction. I felt like that they were like, I don't know if it was, let's see, what was the race results for the first two races?
While Todd's looking that up, I just want to drop a hot 16 on certified loser boys, aka Mercedes. Not kid. But at the same time, like, I get that you ultimately have Lewis Hamilton in the twilight of his prime, if not already exiting that prime. And you kind of want to capitalize on that. You want to give him that opportunity to ultimately win that title that puts him one over Schumacher, who's considered to be the modern GOAT. And he is now the modern GOAT just by a sheer number of rings perspective. It's not going to happen, it seems. So ultimately now it just seems like a race of, will Max get to 7? And then there's a 3-way tie, because right now it's truly shaping up this narrative that Schumacher was Larry Bird, Lewis Hamilton was Magic Johnson, and now it seems Max might be Michael Jordan at this point, because it seems the only person Max is chasing now is his own potential, which is a daunting task if you are a past racer who's been very comfortable in terms of their laurels, in terms of their accomplishments, to establish their precedence as the GOAT or the GOATs.
I think Max is chasing his father's love, the one thing he can't have.
I think if
that was also a joke that was said in our Discord.
That's probably 100% accurate, though, if we're really going to be going into therapy mode. But before we move on from that statement, Lewis finished 5th in the first and second races. He finished 2nd in the third race. George finished 4th in either the first or second race. To say that you're emotionally scarred from finishing in the top 5, what is that? 4 out of 6 opportunities as a team is like exactly why I think Mercedes is sandbagging. I just think that they just play to everybody's. It's just like Drake. You said it. It's just like Drake. Is Drake really as emotionally scarred and damaged and love struck as he comes across on an album? No, he's selling a fucking album. Mercedes is selling everybody on the idea that this is just such a struggle for them. How will they ever get through it? It's just going to be such an emotionally draining. Oh God, we can't do it. We're just Mercedes. We've just won 8 of the last 10 titles. This is such a rough experience for us. How will we try to be Williams? You mother. Sorry. Like,
no, put it this
counterpoint. Hold on. I have to jump in here. Granted, what you said sounds good, right? Like, oh, they finished 5th and 4th and 5th and whatever. It's only been 3 races. And now they got Lewis in P2. George would have been up there if he didn't explode. However, I will counter that point with combined total time behind Max in the first 3 races is like a minute and a half. The first race, they were 50 seconds behind. And I believe that's why they posted the like, oh, we're all in our fields. We're so terrible. We're gonna get better. Sorry, bro. I had to put that in there.
No. In fact, it's one of those things that I know we've been comparing him to Drake. I think that level of fake humbleness, that woe is me, but God dang it, I'm going to try so hard next time, is more Taylor Swift than Drake at this point. Because nobody does fake humbleness better than Tay-Tay.
Don't you speak ill of my girl.
Really? When did this unholy alliance? I know I've been gone for a month, but really? Like, is this Coco's doing?
It might be one day.
Todd, I was going to say, it costs a college semester to get tickets to her show based on what I'm saying, and I would rather Coco get a fine university education at Arizona State or San Luis Obispo than go to a Taylor Swift concert. And if you guys have issues with that, you can find me on Instagram at RAHBEE702.
Oh, sorry. I think Nick was trying to make a point there, and we derailed it.
No, it was great.
Sorry, Nicholas.
It was great. I made the point that I needed to make. I just think Mercedes just plays with people's emotions the way that they claim to be emotional.
So here's a mea culpa that I'll put to the both of you.
Which driver from a non-Red Bull team will get the most points out of anybody? Is it still going to be Fernando at the end of the year, or do you see this sandbagging Mercedes thing come to fruition? And lo and behold, next time we have this type of conversation, Mercedes is going to lap even La Simulation.
I think it's absolutely Alonso. Yeah, Fernando is going to be. Honestly, I think that there's almost zero chance that we don't see Max, Checo, and Alonso as finishing 1, 2, 3 in driver standing at the end of the year.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think that Mercedes is sandbagging anyway. I think they went with a concept that, in theory, should really work in some fashion. I don't understand aerodynamics.
It's science.
I don't understand the sciencey stuff. I pretend to on.
You can actually learn about it on TikTok under the new STEM category. Did you know that you?
But see, Nicholas, here, I hate to break it to you, but I'm a member of the Australian Parliament, and I just got word that all TikTok is banned on Australian government devices. So I don't know what I'm going to do next.
I mean,
how are they going to support their favorite drivers? But I don't think they're sandbagging in any shape or form. And they built the concept that doesn't work. And we're going to see proof of that come Baku, because they're going to supposedly, this is the rumor mill working again, that they're going to come with a updated concept, more typical side pod design. And then it's going to take them 2 or 3 races to figure out how to run that concept before they even start progressing. So we're looking at 5, 6, 7 races into the season before they even start to get better pace. I think there was several factors in the Australia race that definitely they had quick cars, and they should have probably been in P4, 5, something like that. But we're looking at race 7, maybe 8 before they actually start to know how to run their car.
I think that's a fair assessment. I have one scenario that I would throw at you, Todd, both of you, but Todd specifically, because the way that Rohit asked about who is going to be, behind Red Bull or closest to Red Bull as a driver, obviously it's going to be Fernando. But the one thing that's interesting that I was just thinking about the other day is like Fernando Alonso and Max Verstappen have never really had that head-to-head competitiveness. And if we get to a point where Fernando is keeping the pace of Red Bull, that could be really interesting, not only for Fernando, but for Mercedes as stragglers right behind. Because even right now, like Lance Stroll is not quite up to the pace like he's got a fast car, but maybe it's his wrists, his hands, stuff, whatever. Maybe he picks it up, but it's almost like, I forget what race it was last year, but it was essentially like whatever the battle was that was happening, and Lewis was basically like waiting waiting behind, and then just cut through and past two drivers as they're battling each other. Right?
Silverstone? Because I feel like it was that. Yep. How could we forget? It's the one episode they keep showing. And through goes
Hamilton.
Yeah, exactly. But like, that's a scenario where I could see that actually playing out pretty frequently if Alonso gets up to Max's pace or anywhere in that, like Red Bull range. Also, just from a competitiveness aspect, Fernando's not going to give Max any room. He's not going to give, like Max will have to relearn how to drive competitively if Alonso gets up there, right? Because Alonso is a different beast than anybody else on the track. We know that. We've talked about how good he is as a driver defensively. We've talked about how just stubborn he is as a driver strategically. I think that's like an actual possibility. Like, we might be talking about it 10 races from now that like, hey, Max and Alonso have, knocked each other out once or twice. And now we have like this interesting mix of people near the top of the field that we wouldn't have expected to be there. Is that a possible outcome for all this stuff?
I think it is. In fact, I would say this, whereas there may be less points between Max and Lewis, I think Fernando has the potential to get into Max's head in a way we've not seen before. Because to your point, it's almost it's that Spider-Man meme come to life, but if you take the mask off Spider-Man, one is like a grizzled vet and the other one's a baby-faced assassin. And that's what I think is going to happen, is the fact that you have a driver that's known for his aggression, known for his defensive prowess, known to being a two-time champion. And then you also have Max Verstappen, which is saying something, because we haven't had that opportunity yet to see somebody stoop to Max's level in terms of the sheer douchebaggery and the pettiness that both of those drivers specialize in. And yeah, it is something that no matter how many rounds of media training both of them go through, there is going to be that flashbulb moment this year where we're going to see the ugly side of the race. And it's going to be beautiful to watch, ironically, because of the fact is then we'll feel like there is some semblance of a competition, because much to Todd's point earlier on in this episode, everything about this Formula One season feels exciting except for the most exciting part of all, which is a race winner.
Yeah, I'm praying that happens. Like, I'm going back to the Red Bull penalty with the development or whatever. I'm praying that really does slow them down and they don't have all this extra pace in their pocket. And towards the end of the season, we do see like the Green Bulls catch up, because like that's like a wet dream, like a F1 fan's wet dream is watching Max v Alonso, right?
Yeah.
Like if there's a race on the line and they're battling for position and say Alonso's in front, God, that's going to be like a masterclass of like aggressive overtaking and defensive like mega skill. I pray that happens at some point this year.
No,
that being said, I don't think it will be. We would have to take Checo out of the equation for that, because Checo is, I feel, a little bit closer to Max's pace this year. He's like 2, 3, 4 tenths off Max's pace in the same fast car, and has the ability to, like, if he gets pissed off, it seems like keep pace and like keep Max behind at some semblance of pace there. So I hope we see it, but I don't think we will, because I feel like if we do get with a Max Checo battle, it's going to be Sergio right behind them. And if you have that rear gunner, so to speak, you have to kind of keep one eye behind you, and we won't get that kind of battle that we're looking for.
Can we get a timestamp right now? It is 9:27 on April 3rd, 2023. And this is, I think, the latest I've seen in an episode where Todd Yates has no faith in Lance Stroll as a rear anything. So that's something to watch. That being said, as you were kind of going on that beautiful monologue, the thing I keep thinking about, if we get this hypothetical matchup between Max and Fernando, it's very Dragon Ball Z. It's very anime. We're going to get like these 3-episode fight arcs that is just going to be punch after punch after dodge after punch after kick. And then all of a sudden, little Krillin is going to pop up out of nowhere and just cause Goku that tiny bit of advantage that he takes out Frieza or takes out Cell. And so that will be me making the Checo is Krillin comparison on your Exhaust Notes Formula One bingo card. So please respect the timestamp. That is actually 9:28.
Can we please get Dragon Ball Z cover art for this episode? Because I know we have a large group of those fans in the Discord that we can get some crossovers for.
I would just like to say that the first time I watched that episode, my dad was stumbling upon the TV at whatever Sunday morning it was in mid-Missouri. He goes, "Why are you watching a show called Dragon Balls?"
That's a fair question.
It is.
And why weren't you? Or why were you?
It's just middle school is a time of much exploration for your boy.
The perfect response.
Yeah.
Okay. We've spent time on the top, whatever, enough. Can we talk about how insane that race was? And shout out to Dalton, first off, because he asked a very good question on the race with the most red flags ever, which I was thinking about Turkey 2 years ago. I actually thought it was 4, but that was also 2. And this race
Was that the Esta Bandit win?
No, not Turkey. God, dang
Hungarian?
it. No,
Or was it
I'm
that
gonna have
race
to go back.
Okay. Was it that race in Germany in the rain where like Lewis got like 13th?
No, God, were they all dressed like the 1950s? No,
Yeah.
The race I was talking about is when they had they did a rolling restart, and they had like the concertina effect, and like half the drivers in the back of the grid crashed into each other, including your boy Lance Stroll. I can't remember what race that was, but this race had the most red flags ever in Formula One history, which was a fun fact. Or I guess that's my fun fact for the episode. That was staggeringly weird. So what are you guys' thoughts on the red flags, the ending, all that?
Here, I'm going to kick the hornet's nest a little. I just think it's weird that Max can't win a definitive race, even though he's the most definitively dominant race.
I did not see that coming.
That might be the hottest take of the season so far.
I mean, he did win. He did win the first race by a fair margin.
Oh yeah,
Like he beat his teammate by 11 seconds.
Of course. Like, I'm being facetious, but at the same time, it's just funny. Like, that's one thing you can always kind of stir up in terms of the Verstappen rebellion. It's just like, how come this dude doesn't do it every time? Like, why is it always with an asterisk, it seems?
I was just trying to lob up more things for you to knock out of the park.
I mean, I thought that it's such a terrible experience for the fans. That's my one gripe with all the red flags and all the like confusion and the back and forth. And I get that, like, as commentators, they have to tell you, oh, these are the 4 possible outcomes of what could happen. But ultimately, you're just sitting there for, another 20, 30 minutes. And like, it was great because everybody was like chatting it up in the Discord. It made it fun, like waiting to see what was going to happen. But if you're just watching the race, it's just confusion. And then you're like, wait, they're starting again? Like, yeah, why are they starting again when, but let's clarify. They're starting again, but nobody can pass anyone. So they're starting again and they're actually racing, but nobody can pass because we've already been through this before. And it's like, well, if you've been through this before, why not just either call the race or extend the race by 5 laps? Some other experience that doesn't mean, cool, we're going to try to pile all 18 remaining cars into the first corner because everybody has a chance to now win, in theory. It just doesn't make any sense. And it created the exact same chaos that you would expect from doing it that way, right? So
would you have rather had them end it there? Because there was only 2 laps left?
I mean, of course I wouldn't. I would prefer to see like it race all the way through, right? Like I think I understand the logic of the rules to say, hey, we've got to run this many laps. But I think this goes back to, sorry, Aaron, this goes back to the same reason why you don't just start the last lap, halfway through and say, oh, hey, we're going to let Max get fresh tires and Lewis is stuck out. All those things that ended up screwing up that from a fan's perspective, either side, right? Of course, you're going to be happy that your guy won. But like from a fan's perspective, it just creates confusion. The sport is already confusing enough for most fans. I think that if you take a situation like that and say like, look at other sports have all sorts of rules for the overtime scenarios, right? First to score, baseball throws somebody on second base now, sudden death, all these different various ways of handling it. Formula One should create something that's like, hey, we race, we finish under green for the love of the game. 5 laps, every race, clean laps have to finish the race. Everything else shouldn't matter, in my opinion. But that's just my opinion, because I would rather see that where, like, yes, it's going to be a little chaotic at 5 laps or whatever that is, but it's not going to be everyone fighting to get through the way that they did on that. Like it was just absolute chaos, right? And it's worth the risk for all those guys, right? Because hey, if you make it through that and they don't reset, like if you make it through that first corner and you're still alive and your car still runs and you make it past the first whatever checkpoint or the first section checkpoint, then now all of a sudden you've got guys that should have been 12th or 13th finishing in 5th or 6th. So like, of course you're going to take that risk, right? It just makes sense to take that risk because it's such a huge jump. But if it was 5 laps and you had to make it 5 laps, you're not going to nosedive into a corner with no exit strategy just because, hey, I might jump 6 places in the positions.
I mean, I could go on and on, but I think Nick succinctly hit that on the head. It's a sport that generates a lot of excitement. And for you to end a race that way, it seems like a slap in the face of whatever forefathers there were that are associated with this. And I don't think anybody would mind winning a race under those circumstances. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I keep coming back to this. If you've listened to this episode or many episodes before it, it's just these guys have always been characterized as going for it, as being the most selfish people on this earth because they have that truly competitive gene. And I'm sure it makes their blood boil that they have to win within the confines of a safety car because it's just not fun. And ultimately, I'm selfish. I'm a low-level Neanderthal that still doesn't understand the technical nuances of the sport. But me understand fast race, go vroom, and winner, go yay. So why not just do that?
I think one other thing that I think of, and I'm going to be a little too nice to Red Bull and Max Verstappen in this next statement. But it also doesn't make sense to end the race in the way that it was ending, right? Like where look, Max dominated the race. There's no reason that, like I understand that as fans of the sport, we also are like, oh, a crash, yellow flag, pace car, virtual pace, like virtual safety car, all the things that are like throw a curveball into the race itself. But like in a situation like this race, right? Max is dominant, should have won. There should have been no question that he was going to win. If you go to a format where you're running, you've got to run 5 laps straight. He's at the front when you restart. The odds of him losing first place within that first lap or two are maybe higher, but the odds of him gaining it back over the course of 5 laps, it kind of resets and like gives credit where credit is due if you've already run for two hours at the front of the pack, right? And I think that, it would be unfair, in my opinion, to have like, look, there's all sorts of stuff that's unfair about the sport. It's just the sport, but it would be completely weird for me, as much as I would have loved to seen Lewis somehow beat Max off that start, like off that restart, it just would have been completely off. And, we don't need any more wars between the fans.
So I thought it ended appropriately, and I'll tell you a couple of reasons backing that up. One, when the crash happened, that last red flag, there was a ton of debris on the track. So much so that I guess the Aston Martin like cameraman, or he's part of the Aston Martin team, he got hit with a piece of debris so bad it stuck in his arm and he had to get like 20 stitches. And there's a bunch of pictures online of this. You should check it out. And the crazy like sidebar about this, the craziness is after they took it out, some fan stole it and took it home. Like they couldn't even present it as evidence because they took the shard out of the suit arm and somebody stole it. But
somebody's got a sweet belt buckle.
Yeah. So the safety factor is my first reason for that is they have to kill the race to clean up the debris, especially on a street circuit like that where it doesn't blow off into the rocks or the grass or whatever. And they have to put the course back in a race prepped mode. So they have to stop the race. The reason it can't do overtime is because of the fuel issue. And we've talked, I think this came up last time we were talking about stupid Abu Dhabi 21. They would have to figure out a system in which they give every driver an additional 5 kilograms of fuel or whatever. It would have to be the same for every car. They'd have to have it measured. They'd have to have the FIA certify it, et cetera, for them to continue racing. But to counter your point, Nick, about like give them 5 laps and like there's more of a chance that all the drivers won't go for the crazy dive bombs. I disagree because you can't make up that much time in 5 laps. You might get a position, you might get 2, but you're not going to go from 12th to 5th. Like, unless a huge crash or something happens in front of you, like you're not going to dive bomb 5 cars in one corner, but all the race cars drivers are going to try. Like to your exact point, if you give them 2 laps or a lap of racing or 5 laps, they know that they can't make up that much time if they don't go for some crazy move. So you're going to get that same results in an overtime, so to speak. So that's why I think that there's really no good way to end it. I know it sucks for the fans, but like safety being paramount and race car drivers behaving like Neanderthal hyped up kids, like there's only one good way to end it, and that's the safe way under a safety car parade lap. Call it. So be it. That's just racing. Sometimes we get exciting finishes. Sometimes we get parade lap ending.
I mean, apparently they could sell more shrapnel as merch if they finished races like this.
That
to be
might
fair,
be the
teams
most,
do that anyway.
that might be the most Australian thing I've ever heard is, good day, mate. I'm going to take this shrapnel. We'll make it a belt buckle. Don't even know if that was an Australian accent, but let me quickly pivot and ask you, to the fan that did that, is he a rock star or is he a wanker? Because that's always what it comes down to in Formula One parlance.
I'm going to go with wanker. Like, I feel like if I get stabbed with something in the course of my job, I want to be able, and like I survive and whatever, like I want to be able to present that and be like, yeah, remember that day? Like I got a 7-inch piece of carbon fiber stuck in my arm. Like,
have you met Hank?
Yeah. Exactly. I want that framed somewhere.
That's my belt buckle. That's not your belt buckle.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. That's I mean, that's just crazy. I didn't even see that. But
so speaking of soul piercing content, can we talk about Ferrari and the frustration of Charles Leclerc?
Do we have to? Man, do I feel bad for that kid? Like, get punted off.
Well. Like, I mean, listen, I'm happy as a pig in shit right now because I've always said Carlos was a better driver, but not this way.
I mean, they've not even just this race, but they've both been having their own struggles. Like last race, Carlos was nowhere.
It's been three races this season, and I don't want to jump to conclusions, but it is my specialty, especially given the confines of this podcast. But more and more, it seems that last year was an aberration.
Yeah. Like, they are pulling their best version of what we expect Ferrari to be right now. And they just tried to be very Italian about it and be like, oh, it was that dude's fault. So we're just going to get this new guy, Freddie, and he's cool. So he's going to be better, right? And they're just buying time until we get eventually the next CEO of Ferrari naming the next team principal of the Ferrari F1 team.
No,
and round we go.
Exactly. It's a carousel of ineptitude. I mean, the best way I can think about it is what you just said. It's like, hey, man, Benato's fake ID was terrible, but Fred, he's got a really good one. So we're going to get all this Italian wine. And then when you see Fred take his fake ID to the counter, it just says McLovin.
Here's a crazy stat. Like, you think, oh, okay, Ferrari's battling for the, third in the championship at this point, right? They're probably really fighting Mercedes. And granted, we're being facetious a little bit. We think Ferrari might be a little bit better. They have a quick car. It just burns through tires crazy and breaks really easily. But like, okay, so they're fighting for P3 again. Aston made this big leap. Red Bull's way the hell out front. So P3, respectable, right? Plus we're battling Mercedes with a perennially good team. As it stands right now, and I know this is just a snapshot at a moment in time, but they are actually closer to McLaren in fifth than they are to Mercedes in third. They're only 14 points above McLaren. They have 26 points. McLaren has 12 after 3 races. McLaren is dog shit. Like, they should be battling AlphaTauri for 10th this year, realistically, right? Their car's so bad. And I know they got lucky with the craziness in Australia to get them some points finally, but holy shit. Like, there should be some alarm bells at Ferrari.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have any opinion or thoughts on Ferrari this season. Honestly, I just want Mattia Binotto to start a vlog where he just sits and drinks wine and just laughs. And that's all. Every week, right after the race ends, he just uploads a vlog just laughing. Just smiling, having a grand old time. That's all I want to see.
I see. I would like to one-up you and say, in between sips of wine, he's actually gardening to really take the piss out of the gardening leave.
Yeah. I mean, just a live cam, like Binotto's livecam.com. And
Yeah,
just,
it's
With Shaggy's
every race.
Boombastic slowly playing in the background, like just
It wasn't.
No, I was just gonna say, you know how during the holidays every streamer, every channel has like the log burning? That should be Binotto for all other 3 seasons of him just gardening, listening to Shaggy.
I would 100% watch a reality show with Binotto and Gunther. Just like a travel show. Like they just drive around a small Italian car and do stuff.
yeah.
Not only that, I mean, I'm not one to give you, the listener, any sort of updates on other podcasts you could listen to. But if they do decide to make that a podcast, I would like to make an endorsement in terms of being a sponsor for their podcast, if for no other reason, just so it would reaffirm my love for the sport.
Seriously.
Can you imagine Gunther Steiner doing a ZipRecruiter ad or a
Athletic
Blucher ad
Greens.
by Matteo Binotto would be beautiful in Italian and English.
That'd be amazing.
Can we can we talk about one quick thing? It'll just be very, very quick, just to squeeze it in.
Go for it.
Our most important, why do they do this question every year? Can we just have the pink car all year for frick's sake? Like, just leave the pink car pink. That's all we need. Like Alpine, yeah. Okay, go ahead, Todd.
No, I 100% agree with you, and I hope you enjoyed the pink car because it's now gone for the rest of the year.
Yeah,
Because
it
it's
makes
going to
no
be
sense.
another black car on the grid. Like, I don't understand this. What is the infatuation with the color black this year in terms of the
It'll have pink side pods.
traces of
But yeah.
pink that result in a stink, if you ask me.
Well, it happens when your drivers run into each other.
Allegedly.
But the thing I wanted to ask, the reason that all the cars are black is because they want to save weight and like 3 grams matter to these engineers. Carlos penalty. I want to talk about that. Is that a penalty or no? There was so much other contact in this race that didn't get penalized. Like Logan Sargent punted somebody off like 3 zip codes away. No penalty. The pink cars like literally tried to fuse into one car. No further action. Carlos maybe he went deep on the brakes. He looked like he was also squeezed. He punts off Fernando because of the consequence. And that I think Trev made that point in the Discord. He was like, no, penalty or contact plus consequence equals penalty. There was also consequences for other drivers, and they didn't penalize them. They penalized Carlos because Fernando's now turning from heel to good guy. Like, what the fuck, FIA? Excuse my French.
Yeah, I don't know how they call that a penalty and not any of the other. Like, I mean, the whole end of the race just felt like pure chaos to me, and I felt like somehow Carlos was like, "You're the guy we're going to blame," and yes, of course.
What if they done to my beautiful boy? Like, he did nothing to deserve that. Like, absolutely nothing. And there's this concept in American football in terms of fumble luck or regression luck. Like, I feel like in spite of everything, Ferrari had a pretty decent year last year in terms of luck, and this is regressing to the mean because it's just this ticky-tack shit. And it's not just Ferrari. Esteban Ocon had something similar happen to him. Fernando had a podium place taken away from him, but then given back to him. If there's one thing that's been consistent this year, it's been how shitty and how inconsistent the, dare I say, refereeing of the sport has been. And I really hope that they take these next 4 weeks to tighten shit up because it's getting absurd. Like, every race has some sort of head-scratching moment. Like, what are we doing here?
Did you just say Ferrari had a lucky year last year?
In spite of everything, yes.
Was that when their engines were exploding every other race, or
where did they end up in the final standings?
Okay. I guess if you put it in that context, because they got P2, sure, they were lucky.
And that is a modern miracle of science. Because to your point, engines were blowing up.
And they were pitting for intermediates or double boxing or double stacking, I mean.
Every day was December 26th because it was Boxing Day for those guys.
Yeah. Okay. Stand corrected. Yeah, there was so much crazy stuff in that race. We could go for 2 hours, but I think we nailed all the highlights.
All right, I will ask you this, Todd. I'll give you both 30 seconds of your favorite thing that happened in the race that we did not discuss.
That's hard. Nick, do you have one?
Nothing that stands out. I think it would have been hilarious and terrible and all of the above if the scenario would have played out where Alonso wasn't in third and you had like basically Alfa Romeo and McLaren like all at like what 4, 5, 6, 7 or something like that before they were like, oh no, they didn't make it to the sector marker. But that begs the question, like, if Logan Sargent comes along and punts somebody across the sector line, does he get 3 points for that? Like, is it like a,
well, technically
a field
that's
goal?
A field goal.
Sorry. I'm mixing things up.
USA. Now, I was going to say this. I know he's kind of been the brunt of a lot of jokes, especially since he's come back into the sport this year, but Nico Hülkenberg, take a bow. Like, wasn't he up to 4th before?
Yeah, he had a great
race. Right? Yeah. He had great qualifying, too. The Q1, he was up there 3rd or 4th, and then he tailed off or whatever. I wish they could combine the Haas drivers' like tendencies because Hulk has been on fire in qualifying pace-wise, and then K-Mag makes it up pace-wise in the race. So just mind meld, figure that shit out. And like Haas has like a quick car this year, so if the pink cars, the bubble keeps running into each other,
the double bubble,
they might end up P6 in the championship, and that'd be a huge step forward for them.
Yeah, that would be awesome. So I know we're wrapping up, but we started this off as debating whether or not these races are exciting, because part of me is like, yeah, Max is going to win. That loses some of the appeal for me. We know that Max is always going to win. I know he hasn't won all 3 races, but essentially, like, Red Bull's dominating right now. As the fan of the midfield, Todd, what has been the best race in your opinion out of the first 3?
Ooh. I have to remember them all.
That's a really good question. It's almost recency bias, but I feel like there was. Well, no, I can't say Australia. It was exciting because of the chaos, but there was mostly a DRS train going on in the midfield. I'd probably have to say Jeddah because of the opportunities for overtakes. There was some pretty good battles in the midfield in that race. I mean, like, that one unfortunately didn't get as much coverage. Like, the midfield battles in Australia got a ton of coverage because Max had just like fucked off out front by 10 seconds or whatever. But I feel like there were some really good battles in the first, or sorry, in Jeddah 1 race ago. So that's it so far, but I feel like there's going to be a lot of fireworks. We're going to have a lot of Max way out front, so we're going to get a lot more coverage for the midfield battles this year, at least in the short term.
No, I'm with Todd. I don't think any one of these. I don't think any of these races have been that memorable per se. And sometimes I think we need these artificial storylines to kind of come to fruition. High chaos of the last race, but I'll say this: I just like watching Fernando Alonso get his podiums one race at a time. So as long as he's winning, it's just a much more exciting sport. So that's the one constant I think that's been the most eye-opening for me, because I've been probably his biggest detractor out of all 3 of us.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, that's a great point.
I think most of the F1 fandom, minus Max fans, want Fernando to be up there battling, because that's going to be pure excitement.
And I think he's doing a great job bringing new people into the sport, or reaffirming the faith of these new people that are like, hey, let me give this Formula One thing a try. And even though it seems boring because Max always wins, there are these little nuances in the midfield. And with this Green Bull resurgence, like, it's just a fun thing to be a part of. So we thank the listeners for allowing us to tell our tales of silliness and technical brilliance every now and then.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I think that's the best way to wrap on this episode, to be honest. Like, the sport as it evolves is it's so beautiful to be able to be a fan of a driver or a team, and within 2 or 3 years it's completely flipped. I'm completely biased on that as a Sacramento Kings fan who's, like Aaron, has waited 17 years to get back to the playoffs. Like, F1 never leaves you hanging like that, right? Like, your drivers, your teams, people changing up. There's always opportunity for people to bounce around. Maybe not to the top spot, but 100% to get to that second or third spot and be competitive in like a very short amount of time. Because if you would have asked us 4 years ago, had we started this podcast 4 years ago and we were talking about Aston Martin in any way, shape, or form, we would have been like, no. I mean, look, we're maturing as podcasters. Todd went how many minutes without talking shit about Lance Stroll? Like, what is this? How do we apply the empathy theory from Mercedes to get more reviews and more support from our listeners, guys?
All I know is Todd Yates is a sandbagging son of a bitch.
I'm just saving it up. I'm sure he's gonna fucking run somebody into the wall in Baku. Okay, give the boy his due. It's easy to not talk shit about him when he's in a fast car. That just proves that you could put Gotifi in the current Aston and he would be a points finisher every time.
Yeah, but could you put Logan Sargent in it? And would he be
Logan
a points
Sargent
finisher?
would be, I think, and this is maybe a hot take, Logan Sargent would be much closer to Alonso's pace than Stroll will ever be.
So can I bookmark a topic for next episode after the next race? I think I want to get Todd's take on who has impressed him the most out of the new drivers, because everybody's kind of had a moment of brilliance.
All right, I'll save it. I want to respond, but I'll save it. We'll have a little mid-season review.
Quarter season review. Trimester.
Yep. Cool. Anything else before we...
Oh, did you get the fantasy stats?
So I will update it for next race.
Apologies to our fans. We didn't get the fantasy points.
You know what? No, I'm not apologizing. Write us reviews. You get fantasy updates.
There you go. There you go.
And if you have a problem with that, you can follow him at MADWATCH, Mad Watcher 7. Oh, sorry.
Michael. But it's just nice to get to do this with you guys again. So I know it's been a minute. So I thank you guys for indulging me as I've turned into Carmen Sandiego in terms of a world traveler. But there's nothing like coming back home and talking to a couple of my buddies about the sport that we all like.
Feeling is mutual. Definitely. It's good to catch up, guys. Let everybody know how they can follow along on your worldwide adventures.
Yep. You can follow me on Twitter at Roheezy, on Instagram, RoadM13, part of the Exhaust Notes, Sneaker History, Extended Universe, Curry in a Hurry, OnlyFans. So yeah, Todd, speaking of OnlyFans, where can they find you?
You can find me on Feet Finder at Curry in a Hurry. What did you? No, you can find me on Instagram at dadshoe. That's DADSHUE .jpeg. Shout out Schumacher. And I think I changed my Twitter finally to also be dadshoe.jpeg. More importantly, follow Exhaust Notes and join the Discord to come scream at me about my love for Lance Stroll.
The link to Discord will be the first link wherever you're listening to this, and you can follow at me. You can at me at Nick Engvall on all the platforms. It's getting late. Thanks for listening. We appreciate all of you. If you haven't left us a review, please do so. We would definitely appreciate it, and we'll catch you on the next one. Peace. Shout out to the Austrian Spitfire that keeps flying past Rohit's house.
Yeah. Apparently I'm in a Formula One race myself.